Top 5 Rare Guns of World War II. Never in the history of humankind have so many weapons been developed and produced as during World War II. The hyper-production of tanks, artillery, and especially infantry weapons reached into the millions. Some of these weapons became landmarks in the history of arms. Soldiers fought in battle equipped with MP-40s, Thompsons, M1 Garands, Stens, and other legendary infantry weapons. On the other hand, there were also weapons that, for various reasons, were produced on a far smaller scale, sometimes in such small numbers that they were considered a rarity, unknown to the general public. Here's a list of the top 5 rare guns of World War II that you may have never heard of. Type 100. The Type 100 was not only the rarest Japanese-made submachine gun, it was the only one they ever produced in any significant quantity. Quite oddly, despite the fact that submachine guns were perfect for jungle warfare in the Pacific and Southeast Asia, the Japanese felt no explicit need to introduce this type of weapon into regular service. The Imperial Japanese forces had started to develop submachine guns as late as 1934, much later than any other major power. Their first two prototypes, the experimental Models 1 and 2, failed to meet military standards. But in 1940, the experimental Model 3 was accepted by Japanese military officials, and it entered mass production in 1942 as the submachine gun Type 100. There were two basic models of the Type 100. The first model, the Type 140, was a bulky weapon that fired an underpowered 8mm Nambu pistol round at a low rate of 450 rounds per minute. Far from being effective and prone to jamming, the Type 100 had several odd features such as a tangent rear sight, a bayonet lug, and even a bipod in some versions. The chrome-plated barrel was one of its best features. There was also a variant of the Type 140, which was designed for use by paratroopers that included a foldable buttstock. The second model was the Type 144, which appeared in 1944, when the Japanese decided to simplify and hasten the production process. The Type 144 was a much cruder but more reliable model. It was stripped of redundant details and had a significantly greater rate of fire at 800 rounds per minute. When you count both models of the Type 100, only 25,000 of these submachine guns were ever produced. UD-M42. Remarkably, one of the least known US-made submachine guns was also one of the best. The UD-M42 was a submachine gun designed by the High Standard Manufacturing Company for commercial use. When the war started, it drew the attention of the United Defense Supply Corporation. This organization was in close connection with the U.S. Secret Service and had the intention of using the weapon for underground activities overseas. The UDSC took control of the project and handed over production to the Marlin Company, which started the job in 1942. The most interesting feature of the UD-M42 was that it had been chambered for 9mm parabellum rounds. This caliber was unusual for the United States market, but was quite common in Europe, because the American intention was to use the weapon for resistance operations in Nazi-occupied Europe. Even the overall appearance of the gun gave the impression that it was designed for irregular warfare, as it lacked any unnecessary features. At the same time, it was a high-quality weapon, made of well-machined parts, with a rate of fire of 700 rounds per minute. It was a reliable and very accurate gun that was easy to operate and easy to maintain, even in harsh conditions. A curious feature was the double 25-round box magazine that allowed for quick reloads. Yet another advantage for the resistance fighters who used it. Whether it was because of the specific requisites or because of the demanding and expensive production process, there were no more than 15,000 UD-M42s produced. Because of the fact that these weapons were used by the underground resistance, very few records of their use exist today. The few records that have been found document their use in the Mediterranean region. FG-42. Among the iconic weapons in the German arsenal that were produced in the hundreds of thousands, there were also some of equal quality made on a much smaller scale. One such weapon was the Fallschirmjägergewehr 42, or Paratrooper Rifle 42, a gun that was made at Hermann Göring's insistence, since he wanted his Luftwaffe paratroopers to have a better rifle than their army counterparts. The weapon was a mix of an assault rifle and a light machine gun. It was projected to be used as an assault rifle, but was chambered in the standard powerful 7.92mm cartridge. The FG-42 also had a sloped pistol grip, a large buttstock, and a bipod, features closer to the light machine gun concept. Even so, German paratroopers used it strictly as an assault rifle, not as a support weapon, because it was lighter than the standard Army G41 semi-automatic rifle. The FG-42 was considered to be a groundbreaking design that would eventually influence future weapons, such as the sheet metal and plastic construction for the American M60 machine gun. The FG-42 was a gas-operated weapon, capable of both single-shot and automatic fire. Like many other German weapon designs, the FG-42 was a quality-made weapon, reliable and easy to handle. Its only drawback was the box magazine, placed on the left side of the weapon. This position caused the gun to become unbalanced when firing bursts. Even though the FG-42 was a high-quality weapon, it was produced in a very limited quantity. Whether it was the high production costs or because German industry set their priorities to arming their regular army units, the FG-42 production was halted after only 7,000 were made. Despite being a true rarity in the vast German arsenal, this automatic rifle has earned a legendary status as one of the best weapons of the war. The most notable record of its use was during the famous Gran Sasso Raid, the airborne rescue mission of Benito Mussolini. MAS 38. The FG-42 may have been the weapon that saved Mussolini's life, but it was the French MAS 38 submachine gun that allegedly ended it. One of the Italian partisans that participated in the execution of the dictator was armed with the MAS 38, a relatively unknown submachine gun of World War II. The MAS 38 was the project of the famous French Saint-Étienne weapons manufacturing company. The development program lasted for several years until it was finalized in 1938 with a design that was ahead of its time. Unfortunately for the company, the client who ordered it, the French Army, decided not to purchase the weapon. However, once the war started, the French urged the factory to produce the gun in the highest quantities possible, but it was too late. The MAS 38 was a quality weapon made of parts machined from solid metal, which made it very durable, but also very expensive. It also required many production hours, too many to produce a large quantity of guns in a short amount of time. What made the MAS 38 distinctive to other designs of the time was that it was devoid of all unnecessary features. There was no bipod, bayonet fitting, muzzle brake, or any other feature that the majority of submachine guns had. The MAS 38 was a small weapon with a recoil spring housed inside a wooden buttstock. It was compact and very easy to handle. The only real problem was that it used the notorious 7.65mm Longueuil cartridge, which was a pistol round used exclusively in France. Because of the late start of production, less than 2,000 MAS 38 submachine guns were produced by the beginning of the war. In 1940, the German army captured the MAS factory and continued the gun's production, but its use was limited to France because of its unique chambering. The guns were distributed mainly to police units and German garrisons during the occupation of France. Some did find their way to nearby countries such as Italy, but in general, the MAS 38 was a true rarity during the war. Delisle carbine. Compared to weapons produced in the hundreds of thousands during the war, those made in a few thousand units were considered a rarity. Still, there were service weapons that were produced on an even smaller scale of around 100 units. This was the case with the British Delisle carbine. The Delisle carbine didn't begin in the Project Bureau, but in the home of an engineer and gun enthusiast, William Godfrey Delisle. He had made his first suppressed carbine in the .22 caliber for hunting small game. In early 1943, news of this innovative carbine reached the Combined Operation Headquarters of the British War Office. Major Sir Malcolm Campbell invited Delisle to bring the carbine to his office, where he got acquainted with its most impressive feature, its near-silent operation. This was the beginning of a cooperation that resulted in the first prototype. The .45 ACP caliber Delisle carbine passed its testing with the highest grades. It produced no muzzle flash and was completely silent at a distance of 50 yards or 46 meters. Major Campbell was thrilled and ordered more to be made. Delisle was then transferred to the Ford Dagenham factory in London that was hired for production. The first phase ended in only 17 handmade carbines, constructed by using parts from other weapons. The base was a shortened Lee Enfield Mark III rifle stock with a locking mechanism. The bolt and receiver were modified for .45 caliber rounds and were fitted with an altered Thompson submachine gun barrel, while the magazine was taken from a Colt M1911 pistol. The most unique feature was its integrated 15-inch long suppressor, Delisle's own invention. The initial batch of 17 carbines was immediately deployed to commando units. The weapon was officially accepted into service in 1944, after a series of comparison tests with suppressed Sten guns were made. The contract was given to the Sterling Armaments Company to produce 500 carbines, but by the end of the war they managed to produce only 130. The Sterling version was different from the original in several features, most notable of which were an added pistol grip and a foldable buttstock. The Delisle carbines were used exclusively by British commando units, though a few found their way into the hands of operatives from the Special Operations Executive. Due to the nature of their operations, there are very few records of where these carbines were used. Though sidelined from the main course of events, these rare guns of World War II nevertheless made their way into the history of small arms. It was only a set of circumstances rather than their quality that caused them to never enter mass production on a significant scale. In the hands of soldiers across all theaters of war, these guns were as lethal as other weapons that were produced.